We're about to take you behind the scenes of a 3-year investigation that took down the most powerful drug trafficking organization in law enforcement history. Bigger than both the Cali and the Medellin cartels combined, more powerful than the infamous Pablo Escobar. This was a Colombian cocaine empire with a reach so vast and profits so great, it became known as the super cartel. Sworn to secrecy until now, our 60 Minutes team was given unprecedented access to the investigation as it was unfolding. Colombian National Police worked alongside agents from ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, whose job, among other things, is to prevent contraband from moving across U.S. borders. The amount of cocaine and money the super cartel smuggled was incomprehensible, and it took authorities by surprise.
The story will continue in a moment.
U.S. ICE agents first got a glimpse of what they were up against when they arrived here in September 2009, the sprawling Pacific Coast port of Buenaventura, Colombia. The agents got a tip to be on the lookout for cargo containers of fertilizer arriving from Mexico. They were stunned by what they found.
There it is.
Shrink-wrapped bundles of money. This one is 700,000 US dollars in $20 bills. As they searched through more containers, both here and in Mexico, they found staggering amounts of cash. More and more money. $41 million in that first seizure alone.
You'd never actually seen anything like it?
No, we'd never seen containers full of cash.
Luis Sierra was directing the ICE operation that day. He told us that until then, tales of containers full of cash were just a myth.
How much space, physically, does that kind of money take up?
41 million is probably waist deep in maritime shipping container, waist deep of cash.
How long did it take you to count it?
It took us 30 days to count.
Teams of agents worked 8 hours a day with Colombian police, counting the money inside this heavily secured bank in the capital, Bogota. And that was just the beginning.
The amounts of cash they moved is unfathomable. We couldn't believe it. And shipments that we seized, that was a routine shipment for them. That was nothing.
A routine shipment?
Routine, monthly, weekly. That wasn't something, that wasn't a once a year or one-time shot. That was standard business.
How much money are you talking about?
Hundreds of millions, if not billions.
Of dollars?
Of dollars.
Being smuggled?
Being smuggled around the world, into Colombia.
These shipments were just one method of smuggling cash. They also hid money in vehicles, luggage, and furniture.
We've never seen the likes of it. You know, an organization operating on that scale.
Explain to me how this cartel would work. Is it fair to say it was like a conglomerate?
It was run like a sophisticated business, a Fortune 500 company. They had their CEOs, they had their vice presidents.
Was it very compartmentalized?
Yeah, they've learned in this particular cartel, you could be involved in transportation, but you didn't know who the CEOs were or even whose cocaine you were smuggling. So no one really knew what the other hand was doing except for 2 or 3 people at the top.
The enormous scale of the cartel's operations was unprecedented, and so was the audacious plan U.S. ICE agents and Colombian police used to bring the men at the top to justice. They did it by following the money, starting with the cash from that first seizure 3 years ago. It led them to a trio of ruthless kingpins who ruled the super cartel for a decade. Luis Caicedo was the mastermind, a former police investigator, so secretive he was known as the Ghost. Julio Lozano directed the group's powerful alliance with Mexican cartels. And Claudio Silva managed the cartel's assets, worth billions of dollars. ICE agents told us the super cartel supplied 42% of Colombian cocaine in the U.S., some 900 tons over 7 years. Much of it grown here in the verdant coca fields that blanket central Colombia. We went with Colombian police commandos called junglas and US ICE agents on a series of raids to destroy drug labs linked to the super cartel. Across streams, through dense vegetation, the junglas led us toward a crude structure hidden beneath the jungle canopy. In Colombia, Steve Klepe is the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent in charge.
How important is a lab like this to the cartel?
It's tremendously important. In the supply chain, this is step one. And you'll find these type of clandestine labs closest to the cocoa fields themselves.
The piles of coca leaves you see here are the source of the cartel's vast fortune. Inside these big barrels, the leaves are soaked with gasoline and toxic chemicals to make unrefined cocaine. There are thousands of labs like this across Colombia. They're easy to build and easy to conceal. The commandos set a series of explosive charges throughout the makeshift structure and directed us to a nearby coca field, where we watched the jungle lab go up in smoke. It's a tiny but critical part of the super cartel's global enterprise. 200 miles to the north, the cartel bosses ran their daily operations from a string of small cafes and coffee shops in an upscale neighborhood in Bogota. That's where Luis Sierra and other ICE agents shadowed them for months.
How difficult was it to run surveillance on this cartel?
I'd say this was the most difficult surveillance that we've ever seen. These guys were so anonymous. They were like ghosts, you know. Trying to identify them during a surveillance was extremely difficult.
In face-to-face meetings at the cafes, the bosses issued orders to their lieutenants.
These guys essentially, existed off the radar. People who didn't lead, typical, what we'd think of as typical drug trafficker, money launderer lifestyles, very low profile, low key, driving anonymous cars, living in small apartments. It was amazing that they lived this lifestyle. That made it harder for us to identify them.
So what's the point of having all the money then if you can't use it?
I remember asking one of the members of the cartel that question, because we couldn't figure it out. And the answer that person gave us was, for the power.
It all began to unravel when this ICE agent turned one of the cartel's most trusted moneymen into his secret informant. The agent was only allowed to talk to us if we concealed his identity, because he still works undercover.
What would happen to you if your cover was blown?
They'll probably retaliate.
And retaliation would probably mean what?
Maybe just, hate on your life or, family. Just never know.
Can you describe the kind of guys that you were dealing with?
But they were well-educated, well-dressed, well-spoken. You'd be surprised how young these guys are. Some of them even had master's degrees. So they operated legitimate businesses, and on the side, they were drug traffickers. And, even their families didn't know what they did. You never think if you saw them out on the street that they were drug traffickers.
Were they feared?
Yes. They were feared just because they had so much money and so much power that, people didn't want to mess with them.
In a daring ploy, the undercover ICE agent infiltrated the top tier of the cartel in Colombia.
They thought I was just a money guy who, was facilitating a money pickup for the organization, so they thought I was a member.
For months, the U.S. agent helped direct the super cartel's cash and cocaine deliveries right into the hands of police and his fellow agents in more than a dozen countries around the world, from Ecuador to Morocco to the Netherlands. In one operation, this semi-submersible, built by the super cartel, was intercepted near the Galapagos Islands. It was carrying 1.5 tons of cocaine. In another, this suitcase stuffed with their cash was picked up in Spain by an undercover ICE agent. Meanwhile, back in Colombia, authorities wiretapped the phones of the boss's friends, wives, and mistresses. The ICE agents and police methodically began cutting off the cartel's main tentacles.
We started with the boss, and from there on we just went down, and we actually dismantled the whole organization. from the suppliers to, to the people who picked up the money, who did the payoffs, to the people who actually transported the narcotics, people who received the narcotics.
The first of the bosses to fall was Luis Caicedo, the Ghost. He'd fled from Colombia to what he thought was safety in Argentina. ICE agent Steve Pepe was there when police moved in.
His look at the time of arrest was just of shock.
Did you look into his eyes? Were you right there?
Yes, he was hooded at the time, and went to make positive ID of him and take some pictures. So we removed the hood and the photo I took with a camera phone.
That was the biggest victory of the investigation, arresting Don Lucho in Argentina.
Were you there at the scene?
I was in a safe house, but once he was apprehended, we did go out there.
Next to fall was Claudio Silva. He'd been hiding at a remote farm deep inside the jungle. Our 60 Minutes team was there in May 2010 when police loaded him into a helicopter. A cell phone call to his mistress had given him away. The mob boss, one of the most feared and powerful leaders of the Colombian cocaine empire, cried when he was captured. The last of the bosses, Julio Lozano, surrendered to ICE agents in Panama 6 months later.
We destroyed their infrastructure. We destroyed their business. The remnants that are out there now have to scramble to try to regain whatever footing they can, certainly not on the scale that they had. And those who are out there still are looking over their shoulder.
Wow.
But ICE agents acknowledged they only got a tiny fraction of the super cartel's cocaine and their cash.
If you look at the big picture, there's still tons and tons of cocaine flooding into the United States. So what difference does this make?
Yeah, I'd say we took off the most prolific organization in terms of bulk cash smuggling and drug trafficking. Of course, there's people ready to step in and take their place, but for an organization to become that sophisticated again, as sophisticated as this, is going to be very difficult.
ICE agents and Colombian police are still following leads, picking at the bones of the super cartel. All 3 cartel bosses are now in custody in the U.S., waiting to be sentenced.